Morning mist still clung to the manicured lawns of Oak Cliff when Arlo Graham decided to fix his own fence. Wearing scuffed boots and a paint-splattered sweatshirt, the billionaire real estate mogul looked nothing like a man who had just paid $22 million for the sprawling Connecticut estate he was standing on. To Brietta Gable, peering furiously through her designer binoculars, he simply looked like a dangerous trespasser. She aggressively dialed 911, entirely unaware that her prejudiced assumption was about to trigger a catastrophic, career-ending avalanche of karma that would completely obliterate her privileged world before lunchtime. Morning mist still clung to the manicured lawns of the prestigious Oak Cliff subdivision, an enclave of extreme wealth nestled in the rolling hills of Connecticut. The houses here were colossal monuments to success, featuring towering columns, sweeping driveways, and aggressively perfect landscaping. Yet they all paled in comparison to the Oak Cliff Manor property, a 50-acre expanse of pristine woodlands, private lakes, and a historic stone mansion that sat perched on the highest hill, overlooking the lesser estates like a silent guardian. Arlo Graham loved the mornings here. At 42, Arlo had built a real estate empire from the ground up, starting with a single dilapidated duplex in Chicago and scaling it into a multinational development firm. He had purchased the Oak Cliff Manor property 6 months ago through a blind trust. He valued his privacy above all else. His wealth was quiet. He didn't drive flashy sports cars, nor did he parade around in tailored suits unless a boardroom absolutely demanded it. On a crisp Tuesday morning like this, Arlo preferred the feeling of dirt under his fingernails. Dressed in a pair of heavily worn Carhartt work pants, boots scuffed from years of use, and a grey hooded sweatshirt speckled with dry paint, Arlo was walking the southern perimeter of his land. A recent storm had brought down a massive oak branch, crushing a section of the wrought iron fence that separated his sprawling estate from the neighbouring subdivision. Armed with a heavy-duty pair of work gloves, a clipboard with property schematics, and a measuring tape, Arlo was assessing the damage, trying to determine if his landscaping crew could fix it, or if he needed to call in specialist iron workers. Less than 50 yards away, sitting inside the breakfast nook of a massive faux colonial home, was Brietta Gable. Brietta was the self-appointed guardian of the neighborhood. As the president of the local homeowners association, she wielded her minor authority like a battle axe. She was a woman who thrived on order, conformity, and knowing everybody's business. Her days were spent meticulously noting which neighbors left their trash cans out an hour too long, whose lawn was a quarter-inch above the mandated height, and interrogating any delivery driver who lingered too long on the street. Sipping her organic green tea, Brietta glanced out her bay window and froze. Her eyes narrowed. There, standing on the edge of the sacred, unoccupied Oak Cliff Manor property, was a man. He was a tall, broad-shouldered black man, pacing back and forth along the damaged fence line. He was writing things down on a clipboard, peering through the trees toward the main stone mansion, and pulling at the broken iron bars. To Brietta, the calculus was immediate and terrifyingly flawed. The manor had been vacant for years before its recent, highly secretive sale. No one in the neighborhood knew who the new buyer was, but rumors had swirled that it was an overseas tech billionaire or an old-money European aristocrat. The man she was currently looking at did not fit her narrow, prejudiced view of a property owner in her neighborhood. He looked like a laborer, but there were no landscaping trucks parked nearby. He looked like he was taking inventory of the estate's vulnerabilities. He looked, in Brietta's mind, overwhelmingly suspicious. Brietta set her teacup down with a sharp clink. She grabbed her phone and marched out onto her back patio, her expensive silk robe billowing in the autumn wind. She didn't bother to yell from a distance. She marched right up to her property line, which sat just across a small public easement from Arlo's fence. "Excuse me." Brietta's voice was sharp, a piercing soprano designed to command obedience. "Excuse me, what exactly do you think you are doing over there?" Arlo paused. He had been calculating the linear footage of the damaged railing. He turned slowly, pushing a pair of protective safety glasses up onto his forehead. He offered a polite, mild smile. "Good morning. Just checking on some storm damage. Nasty wind we had the other night, wasn't it?" Brietta did not return the smile. She crossed her arms, her knuckles turning white. "I asked what you are doing. You don't look like you belong here. Where is your truck? Who do you work for?" Arlo let out a slow, measured breath. He had dealt with people like Brietta his entire life. He recognized the hostility masquerading as civic duty. "I don't work for a landscaping company, ma'am, and I'm just taking a look at this fence. Have a wonderful morning." He turned back to his clipboard, dismissing her with a polite finality that instantly made Brietta's blood boil. People did not dismiss Brietta Gable. "Don't turn your back on me," she snapped, stepping closer to the easement. "That property is privately owned. The new owner is extremely wealthy, and I highly doubt he hired someone to just wander around in the dirt making notes. Are you casing the property? Because I know the police chief personally, and we have a very active neighborhood watch." Arlo stopped writing. The tip of his pen hovered over the paper. He turned back around, his demeanor still perfectly calm, though a hard edge had entered his dark eyes. "Ma'am, I am well aware that this property is privately owned. I am fully authorized to be here. Now, unless you are offering to help me lift this oak branch, I suggest you return to your tea before it gets cold. You are bordering on harassment." Brietta gasped, her hand flying to her chest in a theatrical display of shock. "Harassment? You are trespassing on a multi-million-dollar estate, acting incredibly suspiciously, and you accuse me of harassment. That's it. I'm calling the authorities right now. Don't you dare move." Arlo chuckled softly, a deep, rumbling sound. "I'll be right here. Take your time." He went back to measuring the iron bars, entirely unfazed. Furious, Brietta stabbed at her smartphone screen, dialing 911. As it rang, she glared at Arlo's back, completely convinced that she was preventing a major burglary. "Yes, dispatch," Brietta said, pitching her voice into a frantic, breathless panic. "I need officers at the Oak Cliff subdivision immediately. There is a suspicious, aggressive man trespassing on the manor estate. He's prowling around the perimeter, taking notes, casing the house. Yes, he's a large African-American male, wearing dirty work clothes. He refuses to leave, and he's been extremely hostile to me. Please hurry. I feel very unsafe." Arlo heard the entire call. He shook his head, a heavy sigh escaping his lips. He pulled his cell phone from his pocket and debated calling his estate manager or his private attorney, but decided against it. He wanted to see exactly how this was going to play out. He had spent his life navigating a world that constantly questioned his presence in spaces of wealth and power. He was not about to be bullied off his own land. 15 minutes later, the wail of sirens cut through the serene morning air. 2 black and white police cruisers came tearing down the manicured street of the subdivision, their lights flashing off the pristine windows of the surrounding mansions. They screeched to a halt near the easement, tires tearing up a small patch of perfectly green grass. Out of the led vehicle stepped Officer Richard Jenkins. Jenkins was a 15-year veteran of the force, a man who had long ago let his cynicism harden into a rigid, often biased worldview. He was thick around the middle, with a buzz cut and a perpetual scowl. Stepping out of the passenger side of the second cruiser was Officer Timothy O'Malley, a fresh-faced rookie who had barely been out of the academy for 6 months. O'Malley looked nervous, his hand hovering near his radio. Brietta was already running toward them, waving her arms. "Officers! Over here! Thank God you're here! He's still over there!" Jenkins adjusted his duty belt, puffing his chest out. "Calm down, Mrs. Gable. We've got it under control. Where is he?" Brietta pointed a manicured finger across the easement. "Right there. Just lingering. I told him to leave, and he basically threatened me." Jenkins's eyes locked onto Arlo. Arlo was still standing by the fence, though he had put his clipboard down on a nearby tree stump and was calmly watching the officers approach. He didn't run. He didn't flinch. He just stood there, his hands resting easily at his sides. "Hey, you!" Jenkins barked, closing the distance quickly, stepping over the property line onto Arlo's land without a second thought. "Keep your hands where I can see them. Don't make any sudden movements." Arlo kept his hands perfectly visible. "My hands are empty, officer. How can I help you?" "I'll ask the questions," Jenkins snapped, stopping about 10 feet away. O'Malley flanked him, looking between Jenkins and Arlo with wide eyes. "We got a call about a suspicious individual trespassing and casing this property. What are you doing here?" "I am evaluating the damage to this fence caused by the storm," Arlo replied, his voice a steady, even baritone. "I am not trespassing, nor am I casing the property." "Is that right?" Jenkins sneered, looking Arlo up and down. He took in the scuffed boots, the dirty jeans, the worn-out sweatshirt. "You don't look like a property appraiser. You look like a guy looking for an open window. Let me see some ID right now." Arlo did not reach for his wallet. Instead, he stood a little taller. "Officer, under Connecticut law, I am not required to provide identification simply because a neighbor made a baseless phone call. You need reasonable, articulable suspicion that I have committed, am committing, or am about to commit a crime. Examining a broken fence is not a crime." Jenkins's face flushed a deep, mottled red. Officers like Jenkins despised nothing more than a civilian who knew their rights and refused to instantly submit to authority. "Don't play lawyer with me, pal. You're on private property. The owner of this estate doesn't want you here. The neighbor called it in. That gives me all the suspicion I need to demand your ID. Now, are you going to hand it over, or are we going to do this the hard way?" "I am on private property, yes," Arlo said smoothly. "But you are operating under a false premise. The neighbor over there," he nodded toward Brietta, who was watching eagerly from the sidewalk, "has absolutely no authority over this land. She does not speak for the owner." "And you do," Jenkins mocked, taking a step closer, his hand dropping to rest on the butt of his taser. "Actually, yes I do," Arlo replied. "I have every right to be standing exactly where I am." O'Malley the rookie swallowed hard. "Sir, please, just show us your ID. It'll clear everything up. If you work for the landscaping crew, just let us know." "Officer O'Malley, is it?" Arlo read the rookie's name tag. "I appreciate your polite tone, but as a matter of principle, I do not surrender my constitutional rights just to make someone else comfortable. I am not committing a crime. I am minding my own business. I respectfully decline to provide my identification at this time," Brietta shouted from the sidelines. "He's lying. He was hostile to me. Arrest him, Richard. He's probably got tools in his pockets to break into the manor." Jenkins had reached his boiling point. His authority was being challenged in front of a wealthy resident and a rookie cop. He couldn't let it stand. "All right, that's it. You've had your chance. Turn around and put your hands behind your back. You're being detained for trespassing and interfering with a police investigation." Arlo's jaw tightened. He knew the dangers of resisting, especially in an isolated area with an aggressive officer. He slowly raised his hands and turned around. "I am complying with your orders, Officer Jenkins, but I want it clearly stated for your body camera that I am not resisting, and that you are making an unlawful arrest on private property without verifying the facts." "Shut up!" Jenkins growled. He lunged forward, grabbing Arlo's left arm with unnecessary force, twisting it behind his back. The sudden movement sent a sharp jolt of pain through Arlo's shoulder, but he bit his tongue, refusing to give Jenkins the satisfaction of a reaction. Jenkins grabbed his other arm, pulling it back roughly. Click, click, click. The cold steel of the handcuffs locked around Arlo's wrists, biting into his skin. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut seemed to echo louder than it should have across the expansive lawn. Arlo stood perfectly still, his back to the officers, feeling the cold bite of the metal against his wrists. He closed his eyes for a brief second, channeling decades of practiced patience. He had built skyscrapers, negotiated billion-dollar acquisitions, and stared down ruthless corporate raiders. This small-town cop with a fragile ego was nothing but a temporary, albeit infuriating, nuisance. "Spread your legs," Jenkins ordered, kicking the inside of Arlo's left boot. Arlo complied, remaining silent as Jenkins aggressively patted him down, searching for weapons or burglary tools. All Jenkins found was a heavy ring of keys, a tape measure, and a leather wallet in Arlo's back right pocket. Jenkins pulled the wallet out with a triumphant smirk. "Let's see who we really have here. Refusing to ID usually means you got warrants, pal." Brietta Gable trotted over, unable to resist the magnetic pull of the drama she had orchestrated. She stopped a few feet away, practically vibrating with smug satisfaction. "I knew it," she crowed, looking at O'Malley, who was standing awkwardly to the side. "I knew he was up to no good. You can just tell, can't you? Thank you, Officer Jenkins, for keeping our streets safe." "Just doing my job, Mrs. Gable," Jenkins said, flipping the leather wallet open. He pulled out the Connecticut driver's license. Jenkins stared at the plastic card. He read the name, Arlo Graham. The name didn't immediately register. To Jenkins, Arlo Graham was just a name. It didn't belong to an A-list celebrity or a local politician he recognized. It just belonged to the black man in dirty work clothes, standing in handcuffs before him. "Arlo Graham from Stamford," Jenkins read aloud, squinting at the address. "Well, Arlo, you're a long way from home. What's a guy from Stamford doing trespassing in Oak Cliff?" Arlo turned his head slightly to look over his shoulder. The mild amusement had vanished from his eyes, replaced by a cold, calculating intensity. "Officer Jenkins, I suggest you take a very close look at the property registry for this county. Or better yet, call Chief Harrison. Tell him you currently have Arlo Graham in handcuffs." Jenkins scoffed, though a tiny sliver of doubt finally managed to pierce his arrogance. Why was this guy so calm? Why did he know the chief's name? "I don't need to call the chief to deal with a trespasser. You think knowing his name scares me?" "No," Arlo said softly. "But the colossal lawsuit I am going to drop on this department, your pension, and the town might." O'Malley stepped forward, looking down at the wallet in Jenkins's hand. He saw a sleek, heavy metal card peeking out from behind the driver's license. It was a black American Express Centurion card, the legendary Black Card. O'Malley's uncle worked in high-end finance. The rookie knew exactly what that card meant. You didn't get one of those by being a petty burglar. You got one by having an unbelievable astronomical net worth. O'Malley's stomach dropped. He looked from the card to Arlo, then back to Jenkins. Sir. Officer Jenkins," O'Malley stammered, his voice cracking slightly. "Look at the cards in his wallet." "What about them?" Jenkins snapped, annoyed at his rookie's interference. "Sir, that's a black card," O'Malley whispered, leaning in close so Brietta couldn't hear. "And look at the business card behind it." Jenkins irritably pulled out the thick, embossed business card, It read, Graham Holdings, LLC, Arlo Graham, Chief Executive Officer. Jenkins frowned. Graham Holdings, so he owns a company. Doesn't mean he owns this land. Officer, Arlo interrupted, his voice cutting through the morning air like a whip. Let me make this incredibly simple for you, since you seem determined to ignore common sense. 6 months ago, Graham Holdings purchased the Oak Cliff Manor estate, all 50 acres of it, for $22 million in cash. I am the sole owner of Graham Holdings. I am Arlo Graham. You are currently standing on my property, unlawfully arresting me, because a busybody neighbor who doesn't even live on this estate didn't like the color of my skin and the dirt on my clothes. Silence descended on the group. It was heavy, absolute, and suffocating. Brietta Gable's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Her face drained of all color, the smug triumph instantly replaced by a horrified, pale mask. That's impossible, she stammered, taking a step back. You can't be the owner. The owner is a billionaire. You're fixing a fence. I like fixing fences, Mrs. Gable, Arlo said, turning to face her fully, despite the handcuffs. It grounds me. What clearly grounds you is harassing innocent people. I told you I had every right to be here. You chose not to listen. Jenkins was staring at the business card, his brain struggling to process the catastrophic error he had just made. He looked at the vast estate behind Arlo, the towering trees, the distant stone mansion. Then he looked at the man in handcuffs. Panic, cold and sharp, began to claw at his chest. This could be a fake ID, Jenkins muttered, desperately clinging to his shattered narrative. Anyone can print a business card. For the love of God, Jenkins, Arlo sighed, the patience finally wearing thin. Look in the wallet again. There's a folded piece of paper in the back sleeve. It's a copy of the deed transfer. I carry it because my lawyer explicitly warned me that in neighborhoods like this, people like you and Mrs. Gable might give me trouble. Jenkins' hands were shaking slightly as he dug into the back of the wallet. He pulled out a crisply folded, watermarked document. He unfolded it. There, staring back at him, in undeniable legal print, was the transfer of the Oak Cliff Manor deed to Graham Holdings, LLC, signed and notarized. O'Malley took a massive step back from Jenkins, instantly wanting to distance himself from the radioactive fallout that was about to occur. "Sir," O'Malley said, his voice urgent and panicked, "take the cuffs off him, now." Jenkins was frozen, the deed trembling in his hands. He was a veteran cop. He knew exactly what wrongful arrest, civil rights violations, and illegal detainment meant. He also knew what happened when those violations were committed against a man who possessed unlimited resources and high-powered attorneys. His career, his pension, his entire life flashed before his eyes, disintegrating into dust. I, Jenkins stammered, looking up at Arlo. The sneer was gone, replaced by pure terror. "Take the cuffs off, Officer Jenkins," Arlo commanded, his voice devoid of anger, which somehow made it infinitely more terrifying. "And then, I want you to call your watch commander. We are going to have a very long conversation right here on my lawn." Brietta Gable, realizing the apocalyptic level of her mistake, slowly began to back away toward the easement. I was just looking out for the neighborhood," she squeaked, her voice trembling. "I didn't know." "Stop right there, Brietta," Arlo said sharply, not even turning to look at her. "You are not going anywhere. You initiated a false police report and caused an unlawful arrest on my private property. My legal team is going to be extremely interested in having a chat with you too." Brietta froze, tears of sheer panic welling up in her eyes. Jenkins, moving with the sluggishness of a man walking to his own execution, stepped behind Arlo and unlocked the handcuffs. The metal clicked open. Arlo brought his arms forward, slowly rubbing his wrists where the steel had left red indentations. He reached out and smoothly plucked his wallet and the deed from Jenkins's trembling hands. "Now," Arlo said, pulling his cell phone from his pocket and dialing a number he knew by heart. "Let's see just how deep this hole goes, shall we?" Arlo pressed the phone to his ear, his eyes locked on the two officers and the trembling neighborhood busybody. The silence on the lawn was absolute, broken only by the gentle rustle of the oak leaves overhead and the ragged breathing of Officer Richard Jenkins. The balance of power had violently shifted, and the air felt thick with impending consequence. Waiting for the call to connect, Arlo watched Jenkins. The veteran cop looked like a man who had just stepped off a ledge and was waiting for the ground to rush up and meet him. His face was a sickly shade of grey, the aggressive swagger completely evaporated. Beside him, Rookie Officer Timothy O'Malley stood rigidly at attention, silently praying he wouldn't be collateral damage in the career-ending explosion that was currently arming itself. "Arlo." A crisp, refined voice answered on the second ring. It was Jonathan Sterling, lead counsel for Graham Holdings, and a man whose courtroom reputation was built on total, merciless devastation of his opponents. "Jonathan, I need you down at the Oak Cliff property immediately," Arlo said, his voice level and devoid of the adrenaline that usually accompanied an arrest. "I've just been unlawfully detained and handcuffed by local police while inspecting my own fence line. The neighbor initiated a false report." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Jonathan's tone dropped an octave, turning instantly lethal. "Handcuffed? On your own property? Are you injured?" "Bruised wrists, nothing broken." "But the ego of the arresting officer is currently fracturing," Arlo replied, his gaze drifting to Jenkins, who visibly flinched at the words. "Bring the necessary paperwork for a federal civil rights lawsuit, official complaints for the police department, and whatever we need to file a civil action against a civilian for harassment and a false police report. I am leaving my office right now. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Do not let them leave, Arlo. Do not let them sweep a single footprint off that grass." The line clicked dead. Arlo pocketed his phone. He turned to O'Malley, the only person besides himself who seemed to still possess a functioning brain. "Officer O'Malley, I suggest you get your radio and call Chief Harrison. Tell him to get out here right now. If he isn't here before my attorney arrives, this town is going to be national news by 5 o'clock. O'Malley didn't hesitate. He practically sprinted to his cruiser, ripping the radio mic from the dashboard. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4. We need the chief at the Oak Cliff Manor easement, immediately. Code 3. We have a massive situation regarding the property owner." Brietta Gable, who had been slowly inching backward toward the perceived safety of her manicured lawn, let out a choked sob. I thought you were a burglar. You look like a laborer. How was I supposed to know?" "You were supposed to mind your own business, Brietta," Arlo said, his voice cutting through her excuses like a scythe. "You saw a black man in work clothes in a wealthy neighborhood, and your immediate assumption was criminality. You didn't care about the truth. You cared about your prejudice. Now, you will pay the price for it." 10 agonizing minutes later, a sleek, unmarked black SUV roared down the street, its hidden sirens wailing. It slammed into park behind the cruisers. Chief David Harrison threw open the door and marched onto the scene. Harrison was a no-nonsense man in his late 50s, acutely aware of the delicate politics of policing a town full of millionaires. He took in the scene instantly. Jenkins looking physically ill, O'Malley standing by the cars looking terrified, Brietta weeping on the sidewalk, and Arlo Graham, a man Harrison recognized immediately from a profile in the Wall Street Journal last year, standing on his own side of the property line, looking thoroughly unamused. "Chief," Arlo greeted him coolly. "Mr. Graham," Harrison replied, his heart sinking into his stomach. He turned a furious glare on Jenkins. "Jenkins, what in God's name is going on here? Why was I called out here on a Code 3? Jenkins opened his mouth, but only a dry rasp came out. He swallowed hard, his eyes darting desperately around. "Chief, we got a call from Mrs. Gable. She said there was a suspicious male casing the property. He refused to show ID, he was uncooperative, so I detained him to ascertain his identity." "He was on private property," Arlo interjected smoothly. "I informed your officer that I had authorization to be here. He had no reasonable suspicion of a crime, yet he chose to trespass on my land, assault me by twisting my arm behind my back, and place me in handcuffs. Only after searching my wallet illegally did he discover the deed to this estate." Harrison closed his eyes, pinching the bridge of his nose. It was a worst-case scenario. "Jenkins, tell me you didn't put hands on Mr. Graham without verifying the property records." He didn't look like he owned the place, Chief," Jenkins blurted out, the racist undertone of his defense slipping out in his panic. "Look at him. He's wearing dirty jeans and a hoodie. How was I supposed to know he was a billionaire?" The silence that followed was deafening. Harrison looked at Jenkins with pure, unadulterated disgust. "You idiot!" the chief hissed under his breath. "You absolute, catastrophic idiot!" Before Chief Harrison could further dress down his officer, a silver Mercedes S-Class glided smoothly down the street, parking flawlessly behind the police vehicles. The driver stepped out and quickly opened the rear door. Jonathan Sterling emerged, dressed in a bespoke navy blue suit, clutching a slim leather briefcase. He radiated an intimidating, predatory aura. He didn't walk. He stalked onto the grass, his sharp eyes taking inventory of every person present. "Arlo," Jonathan said, briefly checking his client's wrists before turning his icy gaze upon the police officers and Brietta. "I see the local welcoming committee has outdone themselves." "Jonathan," Arlo nodded. "This is Chief Harrison. The man sweating over there is Officer Jenkins, who assaulted me, and the woman crying on the sidewalk is Brietta Gable, who initiated this entire farce." Jonathan opened his briefcase, pulling out a legal pad and a gold fountain pen. "Chief Harrison, I am Jonathan Sterling, lead counsel for Graham Holdings and Mr. Graham's personal attorney. I trust your department carries excellent liability insurance, because by the end of the week, we are going to test its absolute limits." Harrison held up his hands, placatingly. "Mr. Sterling, let's not rush into anything. I assure you, this is a massive misunderstanding. Officer Jenkins acted prematurely. He acted unlawfully, violently, and with clear racial prejudice," Jonathan snapped, his voice ringing with authority. "He violated my client's Fourth Amendment rights, committed false imprisonment, assault, and battery under color of law. We are filing a federal civil rights lawsuit against Officer Jenkins personally, and against the city for failure to train." Jenkins let out a pathetic whimper. He knew that if he was sued personally for a civil rights violation, the police union might not cover him, and his pension could be seized. His life was officially over. Jonathan then turned his attention to Brietta, who was trying to edge her way back to her front door. "Mrs. Gable, please remain right where you are. Fleeing the scene of an active investigation will not help your case." Brietta stopped, her face streaked with mascara. "I didn't do anything wrong. I saw something, and I said something. That's what the police tell us to do." "You saw a property owner inspecting a fence," Jonathan corrected her. stepping closer to the property line. You engaged in racial profiling, harassed him, and then knowingly lied to a 911 dispatcher by claiming he was aggressive and casing the home. That is a misdemeanor offense of filing a false police report. Furthermore, my client will be suing you in civil court for defamation, emotional distress, and harassment. "You can't do that!" Brietta shrieked, her voice pitching into a hysterical wail. "My husband is Charles Gable. We are respected members of this community. You can't just ruin us because of a mistake." Arlo, who had been standing quietly, suddenly looked up, his brow furrowing. "Charles Gable? From Gable Plumbing and Supply?" Brietta puffed her chest out slightly, a momentary flicker of her old arrogance returning. "Yes, he's the senior vice president of sales, so you better back off, because he knows very important people." Arlo let out a low, dry laugh. It was a sound devoid of humor, sharp and dangerous. "Karma," Arlo murmured, shaking his head. "It really is a terrifying thing when it comes full circle." Jonathan looked at Arlo, instantly catching the shift in his client's demeanor. "Arlo, do you know him?" "I don't know him personally," Arlo said, taking a step toward the easement, looking directly into Brietta's terrified eyes. "But I know his company. Graham Holdings is currently breaking ground on the Hartford Skyline project. It's a $300 million mixed-use development." Arlo paused, letting the weight of the money hang in the air. "Yesterday afternoon," Arlo continued, his voice cold and precise, "my procurement director placed a contract on my desk for final approval. It was a massive $8 million commercial plumbing contract. The winning bid belonged to Gable Plumbing and Supply. The primary account executive listed on the contract, the man who was set to receive a life-changing commission on that deal, was Charles Gable." Brietta's knees literally gave out. She collapsed onto the manicured grass of the easement, a strangled, horrified gasp escaping her throat. She clutched at the collar of her silk robe, unable to breathe. "Jonathan," Arlo said, not taking his eyes off the weeping woman on the ground, "when we get back to the office, the very first thing I want you to do is call Gable Plumbing and Supply. Tell their CEO that Graham Holdings is pulling the contract. Tell him exactly why. Tell him that we refuse to do business with a company that employs a vice president whose wife racially profiles and harasses our ownership." "Consider it done, Arlo," Jonathan said, jotting a quick note on his legal pad, a grim smile playing on his lips. Chief Harrison, realizing the sheer, unmitigated disaster that had unfolded in less than an hour, turned to Jenkins. "Officer Jenkins," Harrison said, his voice echoing with finality. "Give me your badge and your service weapon. You are stripped of all police powers, effective immediately, pending a full internal affairs investigation. And pray that Mr. Graham takes mercy on you, because this department will not." Jenkins, his hand shaking so violently he could barely manage the clasps, unclipped his badge from his chest and unbuckled his gun belt. He handed them to Chief Harrison, looking like a man marching to the gallows. The morning sun had fully burned away the mist, illuminating the Oak Cliff estate in harsh, unforgiving light. Arlo stood on his land, surrounded by the shattered lives of the people who had tried to cast him out. The drama had crested, but the consequences were only just beginning to fall. The fallout from the incident at Oak Cliff Manor did not merely ripple through the affluent Connecticut suburb. It crashed like a tidal wave through the manicured lawns and corporate boardrooms of the state. Arlo Graham was not a man who made empty threats. He was a builder, yes, but he also knew exactly how to dismantle a structure or a career, brick by brick, when the foundation was rotten. By 1 p.m. that same Tuesday, the polished mahogany conference room of Gable Plumbing and Supply in downtown Hartford was the epicenter of a localized earthquake. Thomas Wright, the silver-haired, ruthlessly pragmatic CEO of the supply company, sat at the head of the table. His face was a mask of barely suppressed fury. Across from him sat Charles Gable, Brietta's husband and the senior vice president of sales. Charles was a man who prided himself on his gregarious nature and his ability to close massive deals on the golf course. Right now, he looked like a man who had just been told his parachute had failed. "Thomas, I don't understand," Charles stammered, his expensive silk tie suddenly feeling like a noose. "The Graham Holdings contract was a done deal. We popped champagne on Friday. It was $8 million. It guarantees our quarterly projections for the next 2 years." "What do you mean they pulled out?" Thomas Wright slid a single sheet of heavy stock paper across the table. It was a formal notice of contract termination from the law offices of Jonathan Sterling, citing a morality clause and a direct refusal to conduct business with affiliates of Gable Plumbing. "I received a personal phone call from Arlo Graham's lead counsel an hour ago, Charles," Thomas said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Do you know who Arlo Graham is?" "He's the CEO of Graham Holdings," Charles replied, swallowing hard. "The developer for the Hartford Skyline project." "He is also," Thomas enunciated every syllable, "the owner of the Oak Cliff Manor estate, the estate that borders your subdivision, the estate where, at 9 o'clock this morning, your wife called the police and initiated a racially motivated false arrest against Mr. Graham while he was inspecting his own property." The blood completely drained from Charles Gable's face. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The room started to spin. "Your wife," Thomas continued relentlessly, "profiled a billionaire real estate mogul because he was wearing work clothes and happened to be black. She harassed him, lied to a 911 dispatcher, and caused him to be handcuffed on his own lawn. Graham's attorney made it explicitly clear Graham Holdings will not spend a single dime with any company that enriches the Gable family. The contract is dead." Charles gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. "Thomas, please. My wife. She's high-strung. She makes mistakes. But you can't punish me. Punish the company for something Brietta did." "I am not punishing the company, Charles. I am saving it," Thomas said coldly. "Graham doesn't just own the Hartford project. He sits on the board of 3 major commercial development banks in New England. If he blacklists us, we lose 20% of our annual revenue overnight. He has the power to bankrupt this firm, and I will not allow your wife's sheer, arrogant stupidity to sink my company." Thomas stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. "Clean out your desk, Charles. You are terminated, effective immediately. Your severance package is being drafted, but considering the catastrophic loss of revenue you've directly caused, don't expect it to be generous." "You're firing me?" Charles gasped, tears welling in his eyes. "I've been here 15 years. We live in Oak Cliff. We have a mortgage, country club dues. You can't do this." "I just did," Thomas replied, turning toward the door. "I suggest you go home and have a very long conversation with Brietta about the true cost of her neighborhood watch." While Charles Gable was packing his office into a cardboard box, Officer Richard Jenkins was facing his own execution in the windowless interrogation room of the Internal Affairs Division. His badge and gun were already locked in an evidence safe. Across from him sat 2 IA detectives and a representative from the police union. The union rep, however, looked entirely defeated. The body camera footage from Rookie Officer O'Malley had been reviewed. It was damning. It showed Jenkins bypassing protocol, aggressively escalating the situation, ignoring Arlo's calm assertions of his rights, and physically assaulting a peaceful citizen on private property without a shred of probable cause. We have the federal civil rights lawsuit sitting on the chief's desk, Jenkins," the lead IA detective said, tossing a thick legal binder onto the metal table. "Jonathan Sterling is out for blood. He's not just suing the department, he's suing you personally. Qualified immunity is not going to save you here. You acted outside the scope of your training, and the footage proves it." Jenkins buried his face in his hands, his broad shoulders shaking. He refused to ID. He was challenging me. "In that neighborhood, you don't take chances." "In that neighborhood," the detective corrected sharply, "you verify property records. You don't tackle a man because the HOA president doesn't like his sweatshirt. Graham's legal team is demanding your immediate termination, the revocation of your state law enforcement certification, and a public apology from the city. The mayor has already agreed to all of it." "My pension," Jenkins whispered, the reality of his shattered life finally setting in. "I have 2 kids in college." The union rep sighed heavily. The city is settling to avoid a drawn-out federal trial that would cost them tens of millions. Part of that settlement involves throwing you entirely under the bus, Richard. You're fired. And honestly, you're lucky Graham isn't pressing criminal assault charges against you. You need to find a new line of work. By sunset, the karma Arlo Graham had spoken of had come full circle with terrifying, surgical precision. The lives of the people who had judged him had been dismantled just as thoroughly as a wrecking ball coming through drywall. Springtime arrived at Oakcliff Manor not with a whisper, but with a vibrant, undeniable bloom. 6 months had passed since the crisp autumn morning that forever altered the social hierarchy of the prestigious Connecticut enclave. The sprawling 50-acre estate was no longer a silent, brooding fortress, casting shadows over the lesser mansions below. It had been meticulously brought back to life, pulsing with a warm, inviting energy that completely redefined its presence in the community. The broken, rusted wrought iron fence along the southern perimeter, the exact spot where Arlo had been unlawfully handcuffed and humiliated, was entirely gone. Instead of erecting a taller, more imposing barricade to shut out the neighborhood that had judged him so harshly, Arlo had chosen a different path. Expert landscapers had cultivated a magnificent, natural boundary of thick emerald hedges interwoven with blooming, violently pink rhododendrons. It was a masterclass in quiet power, a beautiful, living border that welcomed the eye while firmly establishing the sanctity of his domain. On this particular Saturday evening, the expansive back lawn of the manor was transformed into a breathtaking spectacle. Elegant white marquees glowed from within, casting a soft, golden light across the freshly manicured grass. Strings of Edison bulbs wove through the branches of the ancient oak trees, illuminating a crowd of nearly 400 guests. Arlo was hosting the inaugural Graham Foundation Gala, a massive philanthropic endeavor dedicated to funding minority-owned small businesses and providing full-ride scholarships for underprivileged youth from the greater Hartford area. The guest list was a deliberate, beautiful mosaic that Oakcliff had never seen before. High society elites and powerful local politicians mingled freely with young, ambitious entrepreneurs of color and community organizers. The air was filled with the rich, smooth sounds of a live jazz quartet, the clinking of crystal champagne flutes, and the genuine laughter of people united for a worthy cause. Notably, permanently absent from the sparkling gathering were Charles and Brietta Gable. Their downfall had been swift, comprehensive, and utterly devoid of sympathy from the very neighbors Brietta had claimed to protect. Following Charles's highly public termination from Gable Plumbing and Supply, the financial devastation hit them like a freight train. Stripped of his massive commissions and blacklisted by every major commercial developer in the state who wanted to remain in Arlo Graham's good graces, Charles had been unable to secure anything beyond an entry-level sales position. Simultaneously, Jonathan Sterling's ruthless civil lawsuit against Brietta for defamation, emotional distress, and filing a false police report had drained whatever savings they had left. The legal fees were astronomical, but the social exile was far worse. Brietta's phone stopped ringing. She was uninvited from the country club. When she walked down the aisles of the local upscale grocery store, former friends would abruptly turn their shopping carts around to avoid her. Unable to afford the mortgage on their colossal faux colonial home, they had been forced to list it at a significant loss. They had quietly packed a rented moving truck in the dead of night, relocating to a cramped, two-bedroom apartment 3 towns over. Brietta's reign of terror was over, reduced to a cautionary tale whispered nervously at neighborhood dinner parties. Across the county, Richard Jenkins was living his own bleak reality. Stripped of his badge, his gun, and his pension, his identity as a respected veteran officer had been entirely erased. The city had settled Arlo's civil rights lawsuit quickly and quietly, throwing Jenkins entirely to the wolves in the process. Burdened by mounting debts and the sheer impossibility of finding law enforcement work with a disgraced record, Jenkins now spent his nights wearing a poorly fitting polyester uniform, working the graveyard shift as a security guard at a decaying strip mall. He spent his hours sitting in a beat-up sedan, watching teenagers loiter outside a defunct electronics store, haunted by the memory of the morning he let his prejudice destroy his life. Back at the gala, Arlo Graham stood on the grand stone terrace of his mansion, taking a slow sip from a crystal glass of sparkling water. He wore a sharply tailored, midnight blue linen suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. He looked out over the sea of guests, a profound sense of peace settling over him. Down near the main entrance of the lawn, Arlo spotted a familiar face wearing a crisp, immaculately pressed dress uniform. It was Timothy O'Malley. The young rookie officer had not only kept his job, but he had grown significantly from the ordeal. Chief Harrison had commended him for attempting to de-escalate Jenkins's aggression and for his absolute honesty during the internal affairs investigation. When Arlo began planning the gala, he had personally contacted the department and requested O'Malley to lead the private security detail, ensuring the young man was compensated generously for his time. O'Malley, scanning the perimeter, caught Arlo's eye from across the lawn. The young officer stood a little taller, offering a deep, respectful nod. Arlo returned the gesture with a warm smile. It was a silent acknowledgement of a hard lesson learned and a bridge built on mutual respect. Footsteps approached on the flagstone terrace. "A spectacular turnout, Arlo," Jonathan Sterling said, stepping up to the stone balustrade. The fearsome attorney held a glass of expensive scotch, looking remarkably relaxed. "We've already surpassed the donation goal for the evening. The scholarship fund is fully endowed for the next 5 years." Arlo smiled, gently clinking his water glass against Jonathan's scotch. "It's amazing what people can accomplish when they focus on building things up, rather than trying to tear people down." Jonathan took a slow sip of his drink, his sharp eyes surveying the glowing tents and the joyful crowd. He turned his head slightly, his tone turning reflective. "You know," Jonathan murmured, the edge of his courtroom persona softening just a fraction. "You could have ruined them even more. You had the leverage to bury the Gables in debt for the rest of their natural lives. You could have pressed criminal charges against Jenkins and pushed for jail time." Arlo looked down at his hands, remembering the cold, biting pinch of the steel handcuffs against his wrists 6 months ago. He looked back up, his gaze sweeping over the magnificent estate that he had earned through decades of grueling work. "I broke the cycle, Jonathan," Arlo said softly, his deep voice carrying a steady, unshakable weight. "I took away their power to hurt anyone else. Destroying them completely wouldn't have made this estate any more beautiful, and it wouldn't have healed the anger I felt that morning. True power isn't just about destroying your enemies when they underestimate you. It's about building a fortress so strong their prejudices simply shatter against the walls. He took a deep breath of the cool, fragrant spring air. He was a man who had started with absolutely nothing, navigating a world that constantly demanded proof of his worth. They had tried to criminalize his very presence, to reject him from the ground he rightfully owned. But as the lively jazz music swelled and echoed across the affluent, quiet neighborhood, Arlo Graham knew the ultimate truth. He didn't just own the property, he owned the narrative. He had taken their ugly assumptions and transformed them into a foundation of undeniable grace and power, and that was the most beautiful victory of all. The story of Oak Cliff Manor serves as a powerful testament to the devastating consequences of prejudice and the unyielding force of justice. When assumptions are weaponized, the collateral damage often destroys the very people who cast the first stone. Arlo Graham's journey from a wrongfully detained man in dirty work clothes to the undisputed master of his domain illustrates that true wealth is not just measured in property, but in the quiet dignity of knowing one's worth in the face of ignorance. The swift and total dismantling of Brietta Gable's social standing and Officer Jenkins's career is a sharp reminder that karma, when backed by truth and absolute resolve, is undefeated. Ultimately, the narrative transforms a moment of ugly racial profiling into a triumphant reclaiming of space, proving that no amount of gatekeeping can stop a person who genuinely owns their ground.